The heroes versus villains exercise is about to begin. Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka versus Izuku Midoriya and Melissa Shields. This fight will be, well, a bit lopsided, you could say. Two extremely smart people and one person that is going to lean into his own strengths pretty heavily. Bakugo wants a fight with Izuku. Will Izuku give him that fight? Well, knowing him, he most likely won't. Izuku is not the type of person to want to just straight up brawl with somebody. Melissa and Izuku would approach the building with mostly just strategy. They want to do everything in their power to distract Bakugo himself and Ochako if need be, but the distraction would go relatively flawlessly. The sounds would begin making noise up the staircase, and as Bakugo begins exploding down that said staircase, he sees nothing. There's nobody there at all. Izuku and Melissa begin to work their way up as an enraged Bakugo begins blasting through hallway after hallway. They can blatantly hear him. There is no sneaking around with Bakugo. He's just flying in and out of rooms as quick as possible. Eventually, they are able to spot where the bomb is, and they see that Ochako is currently waiting exactly right there. They both approach her and go in basically to get to touch the bomb. But just as Melissa is about to more or less strike Ochako 2v2, and Bakugo blasts Melissa into the wall as Izuku stands in front of Bakugo, in front of the boy or the student that wants so badly to make sure that he will be number one. Izuku wanted to avoid a fight, but it seems like Bakugo has forced his hand, and that fight will definitely commence. Yo, what is good, everybody? It's your boy Golden Falls, Golden What If, whatever you want to call me, and I'm back. I'm back with part 3 of What If Deku had an RPG leveling quirk. If you enjoy, make sure to leave a like, a sub, and a comment down below, all that good stuff. Make sure to check the links in the description. And yeah, I'm not going to waste that much more of your time, and we're just going to get right into part 3 of this What If. Let's get it. Immediately, Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka go to attack Izuku, but just as they do that, it seems that Izuku knows every single move Bakugo has in mind. His large right overhand that comes right past Izuku's shoulder is immediately grabbed and he's slammed into the ground. Izuku finds this opening and kicks him so hard that he goes through the floor beneath them. He immediately tries to react to Ochako, going to block her attack, but the only thing is, he doesn't know Ochako like he knows Bakugo. He immediately gets touched on the arm as his arm begins to float in the air. He follows that arm right up to the sky, or at least to the roof, and he realizes what her quirk is: zero gravity. This may be an issue. So he decides to use Bakugo's quirk against him, or at least his explosive power based around his warrior mage skill that is dealt around his idea of a copycat. He begins to basically copy the quirk once again, and he begins to blast around using the zero gravity to his advantage. He immediately blasts toward Ochako, aiming an explosion at her face, but instead of actually shooting her with the explosion, he shoots right beside her head and spins out. When he spins out, he immediately grabs and hugs onto the bomb as he crashes out the window, and he carries the bomb out with him. He begins to float to the sky and hopes that hopefully someone would get him out. Luckily, Ochako is able to help him out and get him back into the window, but of course All Might on the intercoms announces that the hero team has won. Immediately, Izuku basically thanks them for the fight and grabs Melissa and jumps off, basically to get her some healing from Recovery Girl. As they head over, he can hear the screams of Bakugo and the fact that he is extremely pissed off at what just occurred. He heads out and is allowed to sit with Melissa as she gets healed by Recovery Girl. Eventually, Melissa would wake up and she's kind of shocked at what occurred, but then realized what actually happened. She looks at Izuku and apologizes for what occurred, but Izuku shakes his head and says it's fine. He doesn't really mind in that regard, but does say that she can't lean on her technology so heavily. Of course, Melissa knows that. She's extremely smart herself and realizes her faults in terms of what just occurred, and she's kind of frustrated with herself. She let herself down, let All Might down, let her partner down. Like, What is she supposed to think? Izuku tells her that it's just fine, that mistakes are going to happen. He's made plenty of them. But at the end of the day, you gotta correct them. And he begins to say that it's time for them to correct them. And of course, the way of correcting it is literally training. He believes that so wholeheartedly, and even All Might believe that as well. This leads them, after classes, to head over to Dagobah Beach after Melissa is a little bit more rested from getting healed up. She was pretty hurt. She wasn't like extremely like with broken arms and stuff, but she was hurt. So eventually she's basically good to go, and they're at Dagobah Beach talking about her quirk and what to do. But Melissa feels that getting an idea of what Izuku's quirk does might give her some ideas with One for All. So he explains it entirely. He explains that it's an RPG leveling quirk, that it's all based off of statistics and stats that he can raise, and that leveling up becomes increasingly harder as the levels go on, but there's also levels within the other levels. He tries to explain it and says there's levels literally for like cooking, cleaning, running, walking, anything you can think of. There's levels, and there's a skill graph for that. She kind of laughs at this, thinking it's kind of a joke, but he says that it's literally not, that he has a cooking skill and he's been cooking kind of all his life so that he can upgrade this cooking skill. She says that if that makes his cooking even better, then he definitely needs to make her something one day. Maybe they can have dinner. And Izuku, in his awkward self, awkwardly laughs and tries to like murmur his way out of it, and eventually says that he will totally do that. But of course he's stammering and being all awkward, just like the Izuku we all know. But of course Melissa just laughs this off in her own way, and eventually All Might would arrive. He would know that they'd probably be training out here, of course, after the little display that occurred, and All Might tells her that it's just fine, that she has to figure out her own way, and she's always done that all her life, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Just as they say this though, Melissa realizes something. Her own way. Maybe she's been using One for all wrong. She realizes that One for All, well, is extremely powerful, but if put in singular limbs, it more or less destroys your body, and she's seen that, and that's why she had a limiter on her arm, so that she can use One for All at a certain rate without actually kind of making that rate personally using that rate herself. But what if she puts it throughout her whole body? Immediately she realizes the revelation she just has and tries to do just that. She activates One for All at literally 3% and tries to move around. Of course, this becomes a struggle. One for All keeps petering in and out, and she's trying her hardest to not activate it at 100%, because if she takes a step at 100%, she's pretty sure she'll shatter her leg. But it's still a great idea. Izuku even commends her for this and is kind of shocked that he didn't think of this sooner, but nonetheless, they came up with it. The next couple days, they'd be training more and more with One for All at this lower percentage, and she'd get a grip on it, more or less getting it to a 3% to 5% of One for All and being able to move around relatively freely. Of course, the sparring with Izuku will definitely help. But after that 3-day gap, eventually their hero training would begin once again, and it would actually be involved with rescue training. Something that Izuku is pretty excited about. In fact, he is basically on the idea that he wants to save everybody, and if he can, that would be amazing. So this rescue training should help him do that. Aizawa speaks to the entirety of the class and then lets them all head off to the buses. As the buses head over, Izuku begins to see multiple notifications come up from his HUD menu. Just as they do, he realizes what they're saying. 0 out of 5 villains defeated? 0 out of 10? What does that even mean? Oh, maybe there's decoy villains? Like robots? Izuku kind of shrugs. Of course, he's not really thinking too much about it, but when he does arrive, he gets some weird ominous feeling. Just as Pro Hero 13 walks out and greets all of them. He begins to walk over to Aizawa and tugs on his arm and basically tells him exactly what he's seeing in his HUD menu. Aizawa then is confused. He begins to ask questions, ask about what Izuku is even talking about, but eventually what he is talking about is revealed, and that's revealed to be a ton a ton of villains. Villains begin to emerge like crazy, begin to spiral out of control. Shigaraki, Nomu, and also Kurogiri begin to emerge out of portals, or more like Kurogiri is the portal. But nonetheless, they begin to siege on the future pro heroes. Of course, Aizawa steps in front and begins to fight off these villains, Izuku watching as Aizawa turns on and off his quirk in a complete spectacle. Izuku watches closely, very closely, because he knows how strong this quirk could possibly be. But just as he's watching, a warp gate appears in front of him and many others, and he's basically warped out of there in a matter of seconds. He drops in the water below, but he swims up immediately and begins to use his kind of like speed slash accelerator magic, you could call it, but it's just a copy of a speed like quirk, and begins to head over to a nearby boat, jumping up on top of the boat as he basically shakes off the water. He looks at two people are already there. It seems that Mineta and also Tsuyu are right in front of him. Tsuyu says that she was actually going to go get him, but it seems that he's able to handle it himself relatively easily. He thanks her for the thoughts, but then does say that they're gonna need to get out of here, that he's not sure exactly what to do, but maybe something would possibly occur. She asks if he can maybe blast them out of here. Of course, she knows that he has something similar to Bakugo's power, being able to blast off or basically use explosions to move at a quicker speeds, but he says that's really not possible. Unfortunately, he was only able to do that, or at least effectively, because he was under zero gravity. It just wouldn't be possible in this regard unless he wanted to tire himself out and release all his mana at once. Tsuyu understands, but Mineta immediately questions how they could be so calm with all of these villains around them. Izuku looks around to see a ton of them, all in the water, and he begins to try and think, wow, what's gonna happen? What is he gonna do? But then he does think of something. He realizes something. Maybe, just maybe, he can make a strong enough impact to more or less suck them into a kind of like a tidal wave in a way. He thinks and he realizes that he definitely can, but this is going to drain at least half of his mana and destroy his stamina. He's going to be exhausted, he's going to need time to recover for a little bit, and he begins to explain the plan. Look, what most of you guys are seeing and what you have seen is about 2 to 3 times my power. I know that might sound weird, but it's a statistical breakdown that I have currently. I can use this strength enhancement using this thing, using basically magic, which Mineta kind of is weird about and begins to ask if he's some sort of mage. Sort of, I guess, but a warrior mage is kind of what I go by. But that's not the problem here. Listen, I can ramp up that power a lot, and I can send a shockwave to the ground. But there's one big problem with that. It's gonna put me out. I'm gonna be exhausted, and my mana is going to at least be halfway down. Tsuyu immediately questions, mana? What are you talking about, mana? That's a story for another day. Look, it's just part of my quirk. If you want to know more about it, we can talk about it later. Izuku immediately tells them if they're ready, and they shrug and say, yeah, they are. Izuku powers up and his aura flares like crazy. He looks down as he jumps off the ship and just barrels his fist downward. As he does this, his body follows, and electricity surges around him. It seems that he's picking up friction through the air itself. It's kind of odd. He wouldn't think that this much power would do that, but it seems like it's channeling something different, and the friction from everything around it is catching up. It seems like it's a combination of his just basically base multiplier and also his speed-like magic. Doing this allows him to pick up a ton of friction, and electricity surges as he strikes into the water, and it becomes slightly electrified. Mineta immediately starts throwing his sticky balls into the water as a whirlpool opens up, as a bunch of stunned and stuck monsters and creatures or villains begin to get sucked in the tidal pool. Izuku begins to fall closer and closer into the water as Tsuyu grabs him, pulls him away as her tongue gets slightly shocked, but she's okay. It's kind of just like if you got a little static shock from poking somebody after rubbing your feet on the carpet. They immediately are back on the shore, and he tells all of them to get down for now. Aizawa can handle what's going on up there, at least in the meantime. They're just getting some rest. While they're doing this, though, they realize that Aizawa, well, can't really handle what's going on. It seems as if Aizawa is slowly but surely being whittled down. This is made extremely apparent when Aizawa is attacked by the Nomu. Izuku watches on as the Nomu begins to charge forward, and he begins to find a small bit of strength within himself. He activates his power, his base multiplier, to a certain extent of about 7x. Once he does this, he tackles into the side of the Nomu, pushing him toward the other side of the USJ, or at least the wall nearby. He immediately backs off and grabs Aizawa, jumping off, throwing him into the air as Tsuyu jumps after him, grabbing him with his tongue, or with her tongue, and jumping toward the staircase. Izuku is now in front of the Nomu and is debating with what he should do. Just as he stares at the Nomu, though, his HUD menu begins to flare up, realizing that the Nomu itself is something different. The Nomu itself is human. Izuku is shocked to see this, and he realizes what he can do. His HUD menu is literally telling him exactly what he can do. But just as he begins to contemplate this, a whisper comes in his ear. "The plan is this, Izuku Midoriya. It's time to disassemble the Nomu." Izuku freaks out for a second and whispers in his own, basically his own voice, about what the hell's going on. Immediately, the disembodied voice begins to explain that they are part of his quirk. It seems that he has more than what he actually believed, but he begins to just get relayed information about how to disassemble it, and hearing everything that's going to happen, Izuku knows what's ahead of him. The Nomu comes charging in, and Izuku needs pure and utter focus to actually focus on the Nomu, and he just tries to defend himself. As he does this, though, it seems like the villains want him dead as quick as possible, and they're actually looking for All Might himself, so maybe this would draw him out. But just as Shigaraki is about to grab Izuku's arm, Aizawa himself activates his quirk as Melissa kicks him right in the face, sending him toward a small pond. Melissa jumps out of the way, just as they hear the ground shake from above, and guess who is here? I am here! All Might has arrived. All Might has now entered the USJ and charges at the Nomu, punching him square in the jaw. Izuku is able to stagger back, and he stares at All Might and tells him exactly what he found out. That this is a human, we cannot kill it, and it will not die. Frankly, this thing is almost unkillable, but in a matter of sense, he should be able to disassemble it because it's all built of quirks, and it seems that he can reverse his power. Yes, he has a strength multiplier, but he can actually invert that, not make himself weaker, but make something else weaker. And quirks are a matter of genetics. He should be able to break them down, according to his disembodied voice. All Might looks at him weird and begins to think that Izuku probably shouldn't be listening to voices in his head because that's a little crazy, but he'll trust the kid. The All Might and Nomu fight begins as Izuku begins to focus as much as possible. Shigaraki has no idea what's going on, and nor does Kurogiri. He begins to focus on the Nomu, and he begins his charge up. Izuku focuses more and more as All Might begins to lose ground against the Nomu, and Shigaraki begins to laugh at their little trump card, that it's taking too long. But luckily they're able to protect Izuku just long enough for All Might to back away and everybody clear out as a wave of energy gets dispersed toward the Nomu, and actually some gets dispersed toward Kurogiri. And this immediately reveals that the Nomu is a person. The quartz begin to break down and evaporate into thin air. It seems like Izuku can somehow delete them in his own way, but it drained him like hell. All his mana was basically drained from eliminating the quarks of the Nomu, but it also hit Kurogiri. What does that even mean? Izuku collapses to the ground, and he looks up to see the Nomu completely back in his human form, but he looks to see Aizawa's face drop in horror as a glimpse of Aizawa's old friend shows in the Kurogiri's face. He's now revealed something to Aizawa and many others that is a horrifying sight. They just saw someone that used to be a UA student that died right in front of them, but somehow he's still alive. Izuku passes out from his overusage of mana and obviously overusage of stamina, and then wakes up days later with the announcement of the sports festival. Izuku begins to ask what's going on and what happened before he passed out. He barely remembers anything, but the recovery girl says that he's actually fine. His body recovers far quicker than anybody she's ever seen, and it's all based on his quirk. It's really impressive. Izuku thanks her, sort of, but she's kind of dodging the question. Izuku is helped up and is told that he'll be able to participate in the UA Sports Festival, but she hopes that he'll be able to do at full capacity. Frankly, he is a little short in terms of his stamina, and he did basically use a massive trump card that he didn't even know how to use at the time. Izuku nods and says that he'll be ready, and he asks when it's going to be, and she says it's only from a day. It's only a day from now, so basically it's tomorrow. And Izuku heads off, eventually opening the door as Melissa and All Might stand right there. Melissa hugs him and thanks a god or whatever god, and is happy that Izuku is alive. They head off and he talks to All Might. All Might questions how he did what he did and explains exactly what occurred and what the Warp Gate person, the villain, was. And Izuku, hearing this, is completely shocked and says that if they can get him back, he should be able to revert him. But All Might shuts him down and says that it's not that simple. Finding them is practically impossible, and now they know that Izuku can do something like that. They're not going to put him in that situation again, especially knowing the connection he has to UA. All Might is making a lot of sense here, and Izuku agrees, and obviously Aizawa is in a state of sorrow. Of course he didn't see it, none of us see it. Aizawa is that person to hide and bury his feelings down under, but nonetheless Izuku, the day of the UA Sports Festival, walks up to him and apologizes. But Aizawa's confused. Why is he apologizing? Frankly, Izuku should be praised. Izuku helped everybody, made it so everybody was safe. No one even got hurt. And he says he's sorry that he didn't have enough power to revert his friend. If he did, if he had enough stamina or mana, or if he didn't focus on the Nomu entirely and just left him a half Nomu and gave him partial quirks, maybe he could have cured his friend. But Aizawa shakes his head and tells the kid that you can't save everybody. Heroes save who they can, and basically they have to live with what comes after. Izuku, it's hard for him to hear this. He doesn't like the idea that he can't save everybody. At the end of the day, it's true. Saving everybody is metrically impossible. You can't do that. Even All Might can't save everybody. There's people out of reach, and there always will be. Izuku, hearing this, is reassured at this whole line of hero work. Reassured that he wants to be the strongest he possibly can, and now he's ready for the UA Sports Festival, even if he can't use his entirety of his power. The first event is announced, and Izuku is obviously the person to come give a speech. He gives his little speech. As awkward as Izuku is, he's a little better and a little more confident, but still has that awkwardness to him. He begins to explain that he's basically gone through a wild ride so far with the people here, and that he wouldn't want to go through it with anybody else, and they're here to entertain and make everybody enjoy this event. Everyone cheers, and everyone's talking about how amazing Izuku is, and Bakugo has a score to settle. Izuku walks back down and gets ready for the first event as Midnight spins a wheel. As the wheel spins, something comes up, and when that comes up, it's the first event, and that event is a obstacle course race, a race to the very end. Midnight says that a wheel will be spun every single time that obviously these races and stuff happen, and begins to count them all down and says that it's their turn to show why they're going to be future heroes. And she begins her countdown. 3, 2, 1, go. But that is a wrap for part 3 of What If Deku Had an RPG leveling quirk. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, a sub, and a comment down below. All that good stuff. I'll be honest, this video took me way too long to make. I recorded like 15 to 20 minutes of this video, and I was muted the whole time. I don't even understand how I managed that, but hey, it's okay. It's a little late now because I didn't realize that I was full muted, but nonetheless, I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope all of you have an amazing day. Oh, before I actually leave, obviously like, sub, all that good stuff, but I'm also going to, I think over the weekend, work on a Shield Hero movie. Don't hold me to it, but I'm gonna try, or at least try to do a longer episode of Shield Hero, like a series, the Ninja Hero series. So be ready for that. We'll be finishing up some of these series over some time, because this series is gonna be a little bit longer, maybe 5-6 parts. But nonetheless, like I said, hope y'all enjoyed, and I hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later. I don't wanna waste what's left.